So this will be the demonstration about electric guitars and kind of the tonal palette that grew starting in around the 1920s, 1930s, and then up until today. I'm going to try and cover demonstrations between all those time periods. So that's literally not possible, right? I really can't do that. So I'm just trying to get you a close approximation of what that would have been, and then that way we can kind of show you what's available and how it kind of would have worked. Just trying to give an interesting overview of electric guitar and kind of how it was recorded. So I'm recording this on my Canon RP. I have a small condenser mic that's attached to it, and I'm just using the ambient sounds in the room. Later, as we kind of progress, I'll utilize more individual microphones. So that'll give us a slightly different sound. It's just I'm just trying to give you something similar to what would have been available early. It would have just been like one, some type of condenser mic or field mic in a whole room, and then all the musicians would have played through and been recorded onto that one mic. So early recordings were very different from what we would do now, where we would multi-track record. That didn't start until much later. Les Paul helped introduce that. If you don't know who that is, you can check him out. So let's get into the demo. So initially it would have been a jazz box, some kind of hollow body guitar. Rickenbacker was making early instruments, but to me, really, the big one was when Gibson started doing it. They came out with the ES-150 for Charlie Christian in like 1936, 1937. And so that would have been a guitar with one pickup, one volume, one tone. So no extra pickup, no extra tone knob, no extra volume knob. And the amp would have been, it was the EH-150, which one with the ES-150. His guitar did have a tone knob and a volume knob. A cheaper guitar probably wouldn't. A cheaper guitar would have probably only had a volume knob. And so then the only way to get different tones is to roll up and down your volume knob, right? So there would have been volume on the amp, no tone knobs. So if I wanted more volume, my only option was to turn up the amp. But as you can hear, as I start turning up the amp, it gets more and more distorted. So I can't just get more volume, right? The guitar is getting just louder and louder. So the only way for this particular amp, it's a single-ended Class A amp, is to keep the volume low. So if there was a drummer in this room, there's no way I couldn't keep up with the drummer unless I turned up the amp like all the way. And once I do that, there's really no clean left in the amp. That's the volume at half. It's really noisy, which amps can be sometimes. So then the only option is either to gain down the amp, which I have another amp, which is very similar to this one. They're both VHT Special 6s. Like I said, this isn't like historically accurate. It's just trying to be demonstrative of how all of these things would have progressed. So in that amp, it's a much quieter amp. When I turn it up, it doesn't even gain once I turn it up all the way. I think I'll show you a clip. So that was their option, right? So then they kind of got stuck. They were using a pretty simple design. It would have been one tube that would drive the rest of the amp. That would have been the rectifier tube. So that's taking the alternating current from your wall and turning it into DC. So instead of it doing back and forth alternating, it's then just going to be a continuous line. Because that's what the other tubes would have needed. They would have needed DC. So then you're talking about an output tube, and then maybe a couple of preamp tubes. And then depending on the circuit, you know, you get any number of tubes. So then you're basically stuck because all you can do is either turn it up to get more volume, but you also get more gain. So then you get stuck like gaining down the amp and trying to turn it up to get more volume. It just doesn't really work. So they ended up for another design, which I'm going to show you in a second. It's way louder. Not just more tubes, but the design itself, it'll utilize the tubes in a different way. And you'll get much more volume out of it. Which is actually what the ES or the EH150 was. It wasn't a single-ended amp like this one. Again, where it's just the one power tube driving the speaker. It's going to be multiple power tubes driving the speakers. So let me show you that one. So this is kind of the next step. They changed they started improving on the amp design. They started utilizing higher and higher powered amps. So not just an amp with a single output tube, but 2 or maybe even 4. And the output tubes would have been in what they would call class AB. So AB meaning that the tube is on, and then this one's off, and then this one's on, off, and then this one's on. So they're constantly going back and forth. Basically alternating current. Just like we utilize today for our power. Was it Edison? Edison figured out that AC current would go much further, or was it Alexander Graham Bell? Whatever. Whoever figured it out, you can look it up in Google. It'll go much farther. It has a higher power retention rate. It's the same kind of thing in amps. When I utilize power tubes in that same way, when it's not just on pushing power out all the time and the tubes are actually going back and forth, you can actually increase the amount of voltage that they can handle because they're not running at full out the whole time. So if a tube is designed maybe for a 5 watt output, when I put it into an AB design, it can actually push up to 15 watts maybe, or 20 watts. It just depends on the type of tubes that you're utilizing. And so Gibson, and I actually referred to this before, the EH150, that amp was not a single-ended amp. It was actually a class AB amp. The Fender started utilizing that. I think a lot of amps, a lot of hi-fi amps or PA systems would have utilized that because you can turn them up and they remain clean. So the amp I'm actually using right now is a PD Classic 30. It's similar to what Fender would have utilized. I mean, that's loud. That's very loud. And that's only halfway up. Not even. If I turn this all the way up and hit it, man, I don't even think that the microphone can pick that up because it's just going to turn into noise, right? And so that was really what they were trying to do. It was keep the amp clean and still have enough headroom that you could, how do I say this? Keep the amp clean as you turn it up so it's loud and clear and not distorted, not getting grumbly. And that was mostly what guys in America wanted, especially jazz players. Once they were really getting out a little bit more, the amps are getting more complicated. This one has a full tone stack of treble, middle, and bass. It also comes with reverb, which Fender included in their later amps and their 60s amps. None of their 50s amps would have had it. But one thing the guys noticed is as you were turning them up, let's see if I can get it to do it. The the hollow body guitars feedback real bad. Especially if you're talking about stage volumes at, 110, 115 decibels. If they could get that high. Once they had PAs and you had guys singing in mics full out, you could get that. I didn't need to turn that off. What am I thinking? Let's switch guitars. So that's where this next guitar kind of comes in. So this next guitar, it's not a hollow body now. This is a Telecaster. Not a true vintage Telecaster, but basically it's built off the same kind of stuff. I talked about it in my other video, so I'm not really going to go into it that much. But the one main difference between this guitar and that guitar is it's solid. It's a solid body. So no matter what, it's so loud. It reduces feedback. You see that? With a hollow body, once I was turning it up that loud, if I let go of the strings, feedback city. So this was kind of the purpose of the solid body guitar. Is so that way you can turn it up, play nice and loud, and you don't get stuck with the nasty feedback. Now Gibson saw Fender making this guitar and they laughed. They laughed so much. They're like, that thing is so ugly. It's just a piece of wood. When you just didn't even glue the neck together. You just bolted it on. And Fender's idea was if you had any neck problems, if you needed any kind of issues with it and you needed to get service, just pull the neck off, put a new neck on, you're ready to go. Which is actually a really great thing. Gibson's guitar necks are notoriously bad, but we don't have to deal with that right now. So then Gibson was like, all right, we need a guitar that's the same kind of deal. So they brought out the Les Paul, which a lot of rock guys are going to be like, yeah, Les Pauls, cool. They're just one other piece. That's so loud. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for loud. Big and loud. Because you gotta remember, there were no real PA systems the way we think of them. It would have basically been an amplifier for your microphone, right? And not everyone's gonna be plugging into the PA. So the guitar player, the way he was heard was through his guitar amp. There'll be videos I'll show you where you're looking at old videos, even in the 60s, where guys are using humongous stacks of guitar amps and speakers. They must have been so ridiculously loud. Although technically this wouldn't have had reverb yet. Anyways, so this sound is it's similar to what we would call a Fender Tweed sound. The EQ of the amp it's got a little bit more low end content to it. You'll notice, because I'm going to flip a switch and you'll hear it go to more of what we would call a 60s or a blackface Fender sound, and it's going to be scooped out even more. So that one, it's going to be somewhere around 600 hertz. It's going to start scooping out right around there, and then it'll have a boost in the low end and a boost in the high end. I want to say it's like 3K or 300 hertz, and then about 2K, 2.5K, somewhere around there. It's pretty mild. This one, you have more of the low end content, so it's more like around 800 hertz. where there's like a slight boost in the mids. Even if I adjust the EQ on the amp, you still have that. It's kind of a woolly tone, some people might call it, or a woody tone. But clicking this boost switch, it's already more jangly, more bright. It has a little bit more high end. It's probably a little bit quieter for you too. I'm going to turn that back up a little bit. And it definitely would have had reverb. So, what else? Fender started utilizing higher negative feedback circuits in their amps, and so what that does is some of the current in the circuit is supposed to go to ground, and instead of that, he looped it back into the amp. So then it forces more clean sound, I guess. Negative feedback. There is a more technical part to it. I'd have to go read more books to remember exactly what it is. But basically, it makes the amp remain clean as you turn it up more. So not only is he getting more clean because he's getting better efficiency from the tubes, he's getting more clean because of the circuit. The actual circuit itself is going to remain clean. So the earlier ones, the Tweeds, they didn't have as much of a negative feedback loop. It's actually a little bit less. So that's why you'll get like a Fender Bassman. When you crank that thing up, it guns. Like it gains a lot. This amp, the one I'm using, the PV Classic 30, has something similar to that. It's not exactly... It's not exactly perfect. It's probably not even that much. But you see me twiddling with these knobs. I shouldn't. So basically what would happen is you basically have one knob that adjusts your volume, and if you wanted more gain, you had to turn it up, and that's all there was. So if you wanted to be clean, yeah, this isn't right. That's way too quiet. It's probably around there then. Let's see. I'll edit this out. Yeah, that's about right. So at this point, you're the only way you can get more gain is to turn the amp up. My guitar teacher thought this was funny, so he was like, "Oh, you want to hear that?" So he plugged me into a Bassman, and he just turned it up, and he said, "Hit it!" Oh my god! It like shakes. It shakes your whole body because it's so loud. Like it's literally shaking the floor. But it was a great moment. I doubt this mic can actually do this. And that's all you can do for these amps. Is you just turn them up. You just turn them up, turn them up. Especially when you start getting into Marshalls and Voxes, there's one option: loud and louder. So let's get into those a little bit. So this next amp I have is a Vox AC30. So this is a fairly important amp, if I could say that. It's really the second version. The first one really would have been the AC15. The guys over at Vox were trying to recreate something like a Fender sound, where I feel like in the room it actually gets something pretty close to that. It's clean. But everyone was basically trying to cover that sound. Let's turn that reverb off. It's very similar. The main difference here between the Vox clean sound and the Fender clean sound is the Vox clean sound's mid cut is up about 100 hertz. So, and I feel like the low end is actually not as deep. The tubes that they're utilizing, I think, have more to do with that than anything else. Most Fenders are using big bottle tubes. They're octal based. They have 8 pins on them. Where the Vox is utilizing a 9-pin base. It's much smaller. I should have showed you that. That would have been good. Anyways, it doesn't matter that much. It's an EL84, so it's a smaller tube, and it's a little bit more mid-focused. Where the Fenders were utilizing 6V6s, 6L6s, and they're a much bigger tube, and they have a lot more low end. They're a little bit more of a hi-fi, I could say hi-fi sound. They have a little bit more highs and a little bit more lows, where these ones tend to be a little bit more mid-focused. But the other big difference between the Fender amps and this one is the removal of the negative feedback circuit. So that thing that Fender was trying to get rid of, Vox was trying to get more of. The guitar players in the 60s wanted more gain. They wanted more. They wanted that sound. As you turned up the amp, they wanted it to distort more and more, right? The problem with that is if you go anywhere, and you try and play, it's super loud. So Vox ended up adding the top boost circuit. So basically, what it allowed you to do I gotta love amps. Seems like that pot's dying. It allowed you to turn up the amp, get as much of the saturation as you could get while keeping the volume down. Eventually this becomes known as the master volume. So Voxes don't tend to be high gain amps. This is actually a really good example of that. It's got a lot of gain, but it's fairly low output. Overall, the amount of gain that it can handle is fairly low. It's what I would call more of an overdrive rather than high gain. And so guys in England were wanting more. They wanted more, and so Jim Marshall was basically taking the Fender Bassman's design, 59 Bassman that he had there, and then basically modifying it to suit the players that he had in England. So they wanted more power. So the Bassman was probably about 45 watts, somewhere around there. He gained it up to about 50, and then eventually to 100. At this point, I'm going to have to start utilizing some other types of recording techniques, because the amps are getting so much bigger and so much louder that I'm not going to be able to utilize this mic anymore. Especially once we've hit the 60s. They're definitely doing multi-track recording. And so I'll kind of show you what that sounds like. I hope that this mic is distorted enough that it's not really usable, the sounds. I hope the sounds have distorted the microphone enough. So anyways, we'll get to that. Okay. So you can see now I got my headphones on. So I'm utilizing a slightly different setup than I was before. Now I have a larger cabinet, more speakers, a head, and it's all plugged into my closet because it's got to be quiet, right? I don't have a dedicated room, or maybe even in the 80s they started utilizing steel containers. You could put enough sound dampening material in it and you just gun these amps because they're so loud. That just utilizing a field mic isn't enough. Is kind of a quintessential 60s kind of Fender tone. I'm utilizing two different mics. None of them are traditional to the 60s. They're both more modern mics. One's an SM57, which is arguably the most utilized mic for electric guitar today. And then the other is not. It's a Shure KSM 27, which is a studio condenser mic. But I'm using them together. I match the levels. But now I'm able to isolate the guitar sound, keep it from getting into everything else, so it's not getting in the vocals. I utilize some fiberglass baffles and put it into a closet, and I'm able to really isolate the sound. And nobody's coming to yell at me. Why are you trying to break my windows? Yeah, it just became required. It became required. People aren't playing stadiums anymore, right? Most people I know who play music, if they even are lucky enough to play music, don't play in stadiums. They don't need to. They don't utilize that. But with the amps, that's what they were designed for, especially in the 60s and 70s. That's what guys were doing. So right now I'm using it's a Fender Concert. This is a Paul Rivera helped redesign Fender amps. He was there for 5 years, and helped CBS sell Fender, and that was why they brought him in. They needed an amp that was going to do more and be more viable for them, and so that was their whole plan. So this amp actually does one thing that almost no other Fender amp can do, and that's do a gain sound, a true high gain sound. I wouldn't consider it a Marshall sound. I'll show you that after this. I would consider it something more similar to a Dumble sound. If you don't know who that guy is, just check him out on YouTube. Dumble amps. There's a whole bunch of stuff on them. But basically they're hopped up Fender amps that have amazing clean tones and really nice gain tones. And I feel like that's what this amp does. So clean tone, just Fender. They like to be clean. You turn them up, they like to stay clean, and that's really the point. So let me flip on the high gain stuff. So this kind of takes us up to about the modern era of amps. This is 60 watts, push-pull, so that's class AB. So the two power tubes are going back and forth. That has multiple preamps, so not just one. This is the Fender concert I was using before, but I switched over to the gain channel, and this, to me, is the only Fender amp that's really ever had a gain channel. I mean, twins don't gain like that. Deluxes don't gain like that. The only amps that really gain like this are like JCM 800s, something close to that. And that's what this amp would have been in direct competition to. The JCM 800, I believe, it's like 1979, 1980, something like that. And so this amp would have came out in about 82. I purposely turned off the reverb because if I want reverb at this point, I can get reverb. But most of the time now when I record, I'm not even going to use speakers and loud and I'm really going to be utilizing Sims probably, and so that's how I'm going to do my Marshall sound after this. Is I'm going to be realizing it all basically through the computer. So this brings us up to probably the modern era, really. Not using a field mic, I'm using, studio mics for multi-tracking. The amps can be isolated, they're not actually stuck in the room with everybody else. And even now I can utilize software, right? I don't even really need to own the amp anymore at this point. And I feel like this is important. A lot of people are utilizing this technology now. Tons. Guitar players, Pete Thorne has his own amp plugins. Plenty, if you guys know who he is. Anyways, he recorded his latest album electronically into his computer. No amps, nothing, and just picked all the speakers and cabs and mics and all that stuff using his Axe effects. And I think the Helix, the Line 6 Helix. That's it. The whole album is done digitally, not even with real amps anymore. So I'm going to show you that in the next clip.
Start recording. Yep. And nice. All right. So currently, this is an amp sim that I utilize in my Universal Audio Apollo Twin. This is basically the top of the line. There's a couple other things that are similar to this in price and quality. Anyways, so if you remember that last one I just did of the high gain Fender sound, this is an earlier amp, a 60s style amp that's in that similar kind of vein where it's trying to be a big, high gain, just a big amp. I don't know how else to describe that. Stadium filling, giant killer of an amp. That is its goal. That is its life. That's what it wants to do. But what you don't know is it's totally silent. The only sound in my house and in my room is from this guitar, right? There's nothing else. Now I can take the preamps from this and plug it into an amp. I just added the room mic. The room mics add a different kind of... They add another level. So it's just, it's just kind of next generation. And then there's always more gear. There's always more stuff. I have boxes that will let me plug my amps into this thing. I have cabinets that are emulated and utilizing like convolution reverb technology. There's so much now that we have available to us. It's good to remember the limitations of the past and then try and utilize some of the technology in the future. But this sound doesn't really convey the sound of the amp in the room. It doesn't. It gets very close, but it's not quite the same. I think I'm gonna plug the preamp into a power amp section, and you'll hear the difference between this Marshall sound and that Marshall sound. So this will take me a minute, but for you it'll be like magic.
All right. So this right now is probably the more advanced thing that I'm doing. I'm utilizing a preamp from my computer, so my guitar goes into the computer, and then the preamp gets sent to a real tube amp, and then I'm using a mic on the tube amp and then putting it back into my computer. So it's actually recording the microphone of me playing the guitar. So this is like a Marshall JTM 45 kind of a sound. Kind of the purpose and the idea behind it was guys wanted more gain than Vox could give them. They wanted more volume than Vox could give them. And so Vox was kind of before Marshall, and so I feel like Vox had kind of tailored their sound to a specific crowd and audience and didn't really want to break from that. And the guys over at Marshall hadn't done that. And so I feel like they were just more open to trying something new than high gain. And so guys in England were wanting more. They wanted more. And so Jim Marshall was basically taking the Fender Bassman's design, 59 Bassman that he had there, and then basically modifying it to suit the players that he had in England. So they wanted, which I think was only like a 30 watt amp or something. And then they just kept gaining it up, changed the power tubes from 6L6s to EL34s. They pulled out the rectifier tube, which was changing the current from AC to DC. and they put in a solid state diode circuit, which actually ups the voltage quite a bit. So to the point where they're able to get about 50 watts out of two push-pull or AB powered EL34s. So they're getting a considerable amount more power. So this is like high powered, nearly high gain. It's not truly high gain yet. There's a little bit more gain. I think I can go into my computer if I want to. I can just crank it up some more. The bass gets a little bit fluffy when you start gaining out these amps more and more. And so a lot of times guys would just turn the bass, they just turn the bass all the way down. Oh yeah, I can get more. Anyways, so thanks for watching. Conclusions. Amps, I think, are part of the sound. How we use them, what we're using them for. But then also, do you really have the freedom to use the amp you want? Do we need to utilize some other type of technology that will get us close? Perfect, I don't know. I'll put in another video after this one where I'm comparing my AC30 amp and then a amp simulator from my Helix. So that'll be the next video I put out, where it very clearly kind of shows maybe the upsides or the downsides of one versus the other. So if you want, you can check out the next video that I'll post hopefully soon. It's actually already done, so I need to post that one as well. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope you get a lot out of this video. For all my friends, students from DVC, if you watch this, thank you so much for watching as well. Alright, thanks.